What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Roots and Streams podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Yamas. And wow, that last episode with my good friend, my brother Miles, that was something different. As you could probably tell, we had like an idea we talked about and shared like what it would sound like. He's a musician, so he had some ideas about sharing his music, and it was definitely very much so like his vision of what it could be. And um, we didn't like try to iron out every detail and have like a list of songs, but he came, prepared to play. I came, just ready to hold space for that and to also like have some discussion. So I know it was a little unorganized a bit, but I felt like it kind of caught a flow. Didn't overthink it too much. And man, I just even like the last song, just the way it ended, um, I thought was wonderful. I thought it was brilliant. Um, just really satisfied with that episode and loving the feedback and just um, yeah, hearing what people thought about it. I hope everyone enjoyed the music, something a little different um, for the podcast. So I'm still, working on kind of widening the audience of this and still kind of finding a focus, trying out, asking about the streams. I don't know how well that part went. I felt it went okay. I feel like maybe I need to iron out the like metaphor or meaning a bit more. So I'm fine tuning that. Because I think there is, even though, it seems like, okay, what streams are you tied into can sound like everything's all good because I'm tied into these things. And I kind of want to start with that question, even though I know we are more likely to talk about negative things and these are my issues in my life. And when we think about like what's going on in our life, oftentimes we think all these different bad things, right? Before we can then take a moment and think about like things that we're grateful for or things that are positive. And I am like, number one on this list that does that, especially when you're in it. Um, but I want to start with like thinking about the streams because there's always a story behind and there's always a reason behind why you're linking into, your relationship with God, into finding community, into sports, into exercise, or, maybe going on more dates with your wife or spending time with your kids, whatever's kind of giving you life and energy. I feel like there's always a story behind that. We never just, have a life and plug into those things and everything's all good. But I want to start there, to start from like that positive stream and then, kind of talk about like why that's so important to do that and what it looked like when I wasn't doing that and things like that. So I think it's something there. I almost was thinking about like letting it go because I'm like, it's just like too positive, too like, all good, too cheesy. But I think there's definitely something there. And I think if we start kind of with what's feeding us, it'll just inherently also give us a story and reasons behind why we even try to, or we're working on linking into those things, or we are linked into those things, and rooted in those streams. So I think it'll work out. I definitely still am grateful and happy with the content that came out of the last podcast. And for today, I didn't have a guest. So if you're listening, yeah, and not watching, it's just me solo today. And, I have a couple of guests that are kind of in the works. So definitely we'll have people on here soon. But, and I was kind of struggling with a topic. I'm definitely still reading some things. Um, and probably even spending not as much time like in that because I'm like taking care of my son. Also, probably spend some time trying to figure out how to make some money. Probably too much time like looking at the stock market because trying to figure out how okay make a little bit of income in between not working, but primarily being a stay-at-home dad. And that's going so. Some days is better than others. But definitely have more than enough, and I am grateful for that, and sometimes lose sight of that we have more than enough. And I'm grateful that I will be able to at least take care of my son until he's 1 year old and my wife is working. And so, kind of on that topic, something that came up in my men's group, and somebody pointed out, and I thought it was interesting. I don't even know if they actually listen to the podcast or they just heard I have a podcast, but the topic that we were talking about this week in my life group, my men's life group at Freedom Church, was about doubt and kind of like doubt as a father. And we were, there's always questions in there and we're going back and forth. And I don't know, maybe I shared something, um, and someone just pointed out like, oh, hey, so is that going to be your next podcast topic about, doubt and being a father? And it made me think like, there may be something there because, when I was kind of like searching, okay, what's the topic to talk about? And that's definitely one that reminded me of prior to having, kids in general, but because I always felt like there was something in me to want to be a father, to want to be a good father, and that, I didn't, majority of my life around the age of like 2, I think I was told when my parents got divorced and my father moved away when I was about 4. So and then my stepdad didn't really meet my mom until I was about like 17, 18. So there wasn't really like a father figure in the house outside of my oldest brother who did his best to watch us and take care of us and kept us safe. And so big shout out to him for stepping up for that. But there wasn't like a father figure, like somebody that was kind of guiding us, and just I don't know, maybe it's stereotypical of like what a father should be, but didn't really have that growing up. My mom was busy, just working and surviving and going back to school and doing her best. So I say all that because it reminds me of when I had my son. So I had my daughter Mia, and it was great. It was great having a daughter. For some reason, there was like I wasn't nervous about that. I had never had any difficulty being a father to my daughter. I don't know if it's like daddy's little girl kind of thing. But I remember when I found out I was having a son, that was just something different. I mean, even though thinking back, like, man, I always kind of felt like the role and the like natural ability and calling to be a father, a dad. Um, I didn't realize the insecurities I had with being a father to a boy. And maybe it's because in my head, I'm thinking, I'm not the stereotypical guy. I'm like, my friends all like cars. I don't really like cars. And, maybe like got into fights at some point and just, I don't know, like, I just didn't have the features and still don't that, some men have about throwing axes, like not to diss on my church, but sometimes at our men event, like they're throwing axes and bench pressing, and I work out, but I don't know, just something like, being so manly and tough. And I get it. It's like survival and protecting your family and we're warriors, and just seeing like in church, like even like pastors, like giving swords and stuff like that. And I don't know. It just doesn't really connect with me. And so thinking about having a son and like, man, a son, I'm thinking he needs to be those things because that's what's expected of him. Um, I'm thinking I don't have that to offer him. Like I'm just kind of a sensitive guy. Um, I'm pretty good at listening. I can be kind of creative. I'm decent at basketball, and I picked that up late into my life, just in high school. Um, and yeah, I just felt very inadequate and was doubting like if I would do a good job. And I remember thinking that and kind of stressed about it, but also not overthinking it. I think what helped me is just letting my son be him, letting me be me, and just not overthinking it. In the beginning, before it happened, I was kind of stressed about it, doubting. Um, but as we kind of worked into it, um, noticing, I think it's probably my energies are better spent at just paying attention to my son and what he needs and not having expectations for him. When I have expectations, I put stress on him, I put stress on myself. I think there's like positive expectations about like, being a good person and loving but when I have ones that are just to fulfill other people's expectations and comparisons, um, I found myself like not going towards that. And so, yeah, so that's the topic for today, like being doubting while being a father or like having doubt in fatherhood. So I got some help, from my good old buddy, ChatGPT, to give me some questions because I kind of just wanted to have kind of a deeper dive into this and even allow myself to rethink about my fatherhood, um, and just being a dad and just some doubts that I have. Um, so here's the first question. So how do I step into fatherhood when I never had a father to show me the way? Um, for me, I think I kind of already mentioned it is I stepped into it, um, really just focusing on showing my kids love, trying to give them attention. And, when I noticed and I started to learn how important it is to give them attention, to give them space to talk, to give them space to have emotions. And I'm still learning this, and hopefully my second wave of kids, my younger two, get it even more, because they're just always trying to improve, hopefully. But there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that, you'll be better just because you're older. But we're trying. Is just to give them space to question things, give them space to be sad, to be angry. And those are probably the hardest things, that I'm realizing is, I think not having necessarily a dad to do that for me, makes me reflect about times like when it was kind of just shut down or nobody was there. Um, and now that there are people like there around my kids, like, and it could, it's so easy to shut down negativity, like negative emotions or crying or anger. Um, but I think maybe what helps, trying to think to answer this question, is to kind of, even though they're kids, and oftentimes we don't talk about our kids the way we would adults, but like treating others the way you would want to be treated. Because I think about, man, how would I feel, if I was my son and, my dad was just telling me to stop crying or, um, you know, be really unfair and not listen to me or not spend time with me. So I try to, not overtly, because that can make me really anxious, but try to put myself in their shoes. And it helps as a reminder to like spend time with them. Oh man, like, have I, checked in with my daughter lately, or, if my son's really down, and, or, my youngest daughter, she can, definitely get into her feelings. Thinking about like just shutting her down. And, it took some time to even learn the option of, hey, just cry. It's okay. Like if you just need to cry, just cry. And my wife recently told me that, because I think I was telling Gabby, my youngest daughter, like, okay, I'm not going to pick you up unless you stop crying. And my wife told me, well, so kind of it's in the same kind of like area of just saying, okay, when you're done crying, I'll pick you up. And I think that kind of allows space for them to feel like, okay, it's okay if I cry. And once I'm done, then I'll connect with dad. Instead of me shutting it down, she still kind of just stops. But, I think that's healthier. Either somebody put it in the comments if you know a better way. But I feel like that's been working. So just, even though nobody showed me the way, just trying to do something real simple and just treating them the way I would have wanted to be treated when I was young. And maybe, maybe I'm grateful, and it was positive that I didn't have it like a really strong, like overt, like male, kind of tell me this is the way things should be, so that then I'm shitting on my kids. I guess I'm kind of grateful in this moment that, I had a somewhat empty canvas and can launch off of just treating my kids, when I can. It's not perfect, because it sounds simple, but it takes a lot of energy to stop yourself and think, because like for me, I'm either cooking or, the baby's crying and I'm trying to get to my basketball game in time and set things up, or people need to take showers. It's just the things that we're just constantly juggling in life, at least in this society, or at least in this city of Los Angeles. It feels like we're juggling a lot. So, juggling all those things and our emotions and their emotions, it's really difficult. But when I kind of get a window and an opportunity, I try to stop myself to check in with them, or to like hold space for them to have their emotions. Like the other day, my son was having a hard time with his homework, and maybe I'm almost certain it's not only my kid who has trouble and just like gets really stressed with school, because I've heard this from other parents. Um, but and I think in the past maybe I've done a poor job at it and just kind of shut him down, or tell him like what, and I kind of did, like, why are you crying? Like, don't cry. Like, or why are you so frustrated about this? Like, it's not a big deal. Um, to some extent I do try to bring in some reasoning for him, but also I was like, because he was doing it in a space where we all were, and was kind of like stressing us all, but was stuck in it. I hope it was enough. I just told him, you know what? I know you're stressed right now, but I need you to kind of go to your room and, go ahead and finish. Like, just be angry, be stressed. It's not really serving any purpose here, and there's nothing we can do to help you like with this assignment right now, because you just kind of want to do it your way. And I saw kind of something that I only do for my younger children. Well, my youngest daughter, and like just giving them that space is like, okay, you need to cry, like go ahead and cry on the floor. Not he didn't do that, but he just need to go to his room and just be angry for a little bit. And I'm not necessarily. I guess I can be like that too, especially if I'm like arguing with my wife. Sometimes I just need space. I just need space to process, maybe just to convince myself out of it. So I'm kind of beating this question, but I think we really is trying to think about things that we need, and not try to push away emotions. It's very hard for me sometimes, especially with negative and like frustrating and like very like in your face emotion can be difficult for me. Like emotions like, oh, I'm just sad and I want you to listen to me. Like, that's easy for me, but it's like overpowering. Like there's a reaction, like just anger or crying, like just to the point where it feels like it's just really like just frustrating crying. It's difficult, but I think holding space for that. And I think in short, um, trying to treat my kids the way I would want to be treated as a kid, is helpful. So, you know what? I even asked for like a Bible verse to go with each of these questions. And so this one says Psalm 68:5, a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. I think father to the fatherless is something I've heard it quoted before. And I feel like at different times, and I've heard this different people share this, is like have definitely felt God, um, kind of point things out in my life to show like how He was there for me, like how even though I felt like, and I don't dwell in it necessarily, and part of me is like, I didn't have a dad, and it's fine. Yeah, I know it kind of like fed into my doubt of being a father, but um, I don't know. I don't really like think, oh man, I missed out, and I dwell in it, because I had like uncles and good uncles around, and like I said, my older brother, definitely like enough, and my mom was there. Um, but there's definitely some times where we're difficult, and I feel like God has shown me, and helped me to realize in those moments how He was there for me. Let's see the second question. How do I handle the pressure of being a husband and father when I feel uncertain or unqualified? Ooh. Feelings of uncertainty and being unqualified. Um, Man, those are some tough ones. I think I would, part of me is like, oh, I never feel uncertain or unqualified, but um, I think this is a time of like not necessarily being a provider. It is a difficult time, and not having like that constant and consistent income. Um, and what has, what I kind of end up doing sometimes is kind of holding things in. And I used to be way worse at this and like carry it even without knowing I'm carrying it. Um, and this is like how I would just handle the pressure, is just kind of pressurize myself, kind of be um, that propane tank, and just hold it all in and not explode, and just keep filling it up, even though it's all tight, and not let anything out. And I'm pretty good at it, actually. There's definitely times where it builds up to the point. It takes a long time. So I think it sometimes doesn't help me that I'm so good at keeping all the pressure in and kind of being a cool head sometimes. Um, because then I lean on that, and that is my way of handling it when I'm uncertain or feel unqualified or feel like I'm not doing a good job, or um, just feel less than or frustrated. Um, However, there, because in these last couple of years, um, I have been, and I feel it kind of going in the opposite direction, but in the last few years, I've been tying myself to so many, like getting myself inserted into so much community. Um, like, you know, unfortunately, lost my therapist, insurance things. So that's one less thing, but I need to get back into that. Just having like friend groups, life groups, um, and like especially like with people that I've been meeting lately, and seeing them so often, and being so vulnerable, and just me being vulnerable with them being vulnerable with me, so that when we're around each other, we kind of just know already and feel safer, and almost expect like, okay, we can share what's going on. Um, and with my wife as well, like doing marriage counseling, um, and us coming to each other in more vulnerable states. Just so much, being surrounded by so much vulnerability in my community, and being around community so often. I mean, our days, if it's not this life group, then it's the other one. Like, we're in a marriage life group, I'm in a men's life group. I talk to my tribe, even though, not calling them out, but we've missed a few weeks. I talk to like my Italian sister Vero. I try at least once a week, but we get busy. So there's like so many instances of like me connecting with somebody, and just little by little getting more and more vulnerable. Um, I say all that because when for me, the experience of vulnerability and community so constant is going to, if we stay on the idea of like being the propane tank, like there's going to be people just like that are going to be releasing, and going to be like just turning on that valve, and like we're going to burn things up in conversation, and things are going to come out like, and because there's so many opportunities right now, I feel like there's less and less pressure. It still is difficult, and like I find myself second guessing whether I should share things. Um, but it has been helpful just being close to it, just being close to the vulnerability, being close to community offers so many opportunities and so many moments of being able to share. I think before, in the past, it was just like me and my wife, and we hang out with friends once in a while, but maybe just to like have a good time, not anything too deep. We'd have our kids and try to go places, and that was it. It was just like, work, spend time with the family, spend time with some friends to have some fun, and that was it. But I think now that we've like kind of folded into so many days of our week, like just moments where we pause and like talk to people really deeply and be vulnerable. And like the whole object of that time that we're together is to be vulnerable, to go deeper, to talk about our spirituality, to talk about our faith, to question things, um, to kind of just give a space for people and ourselves work on ourselves and to maybe share some things that are on our mind that we wouldn't say elsewhere. Having so many opportunities like that has been a release valve for me, and definitely keeping a lot less in. I'm not saying it's any easier, like it's just so easy now, but just being around it so often, inevitably has been kind of keeping me just a little bit more even these days. Oh, let's see. Here's the verse that it tied to this question. So my grace is sufficient for you, Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Ooh, that kind of gives me a little rabbit hole to go down into. Now we got to decide if we're going to go down there. That like when we are weak, he is strong. I was kind of talking that over with my therapist not too long ago, and we got into the whole idea of like weakness. Like, why is being vulnerable, or why is when you can just admit that like you can't do something, or you're sad, or you're mourning, or you're just like incapable of something, like why is it seen as weak? And I think it was more so like the idea of those things, like when we are just like confessing or admitting that we're wrong, or coming to somebody like feeling like we're not enough, or asking for help, like those are moments of weakness. And I think she was trying to get at, and we were kind of going towards, is like how that is like, that is strength, but we shouldn't have to call it weakness, and I don't know, kind of like it was definitely it was tangling, like it was tangled up thoughts there. But obviously the idea of that is because like when we can kind of just surrender and like let God be God, and don't try to like over complicate things and overwork things and over plan things. I think that's what that verse is talking about. But just something about the idea of like calling it weak. I think it was like mainly the word like calling it weakness. But yeah, it was just interesting dive there. But I think allowing myself to be connected to people and like sharing when I'm not maybe at my best, or when I don't have it all figured out, has definitely been helpful. And I feel like that God has definitely provided that, and it can only provide that when I can allow myself to be that way. Let's see the next question. How do I lead my son well when I didn't have an example to follow? It's interesting because I feel like he's so different than me, but maybe I just don't remember enough from when I was young. And he's not going to be the same, and he's not going to be completely different. But one thing I try to do, and is that I try to be aware of like even when I'm driving, or when how I treat people, or like when we're walking in the community. I'm obviously like partly doing it for myself and being the person I'm trying to be just for myself, but also to some extent, I know that that's not just for me. Like I know that the way I act, yes, I'm doing it because I'm working on myself. I'm trying to be obedient. I'm trying to, give out love and be generous. And at times I take my mind off of the idea that my kids are watching me. But at times I do realize that they are. Like when I give to, somebody who's asking for money, out in the streets, I try not to do it necessarily just because like, oh, let me show my kids that I have money, or that I'm just a super kind person. And I know they are watching, like I said, like even from as simple as like the way I drive on the street, so maybe they don't even notice, maybe because they don't notice like that car that cut me off, and because I don't react, or, we're kind of late somewhere, but I'm not going to drive like a maniac, or I don't know if they notice now, and maybe they'll understand when they're older. Um, but I think um, trying to just be that example of like a loving person, a generous person. And I think only having the example of what I read in the Bible. I know you can argue, and if you probably have seen enough episodes and you're like not into religion or like faith or God or the Bible, you're probably not listening at this point. Um, but for me, it's been learning about um, and I brought that up because I know some people are like, well, God is like an angry God and his wrath and killed people in the Bible and this and that. But I think, the majority of the Bible talks about like how God is generous, how he rains down on everybody, not on just the people who are worshiping him, like, and how there's more enough and more than enough for everybody. Um, and so just kind of like studying his character and the wisdom and the beautiful teachings of Jesus, like I have hope in those that the world can, gravitate and trend towards that direction of like sharing because we believe there's more than enough and not, being greedy. Um, and so like just be having that example is something I kind of point myself towards and hoping that my kids see it. Sometimes I do try to be very like like thoughtful or intentional with it, and they'll ask me questions, and that's when I can like be that more intentional and let them know, not just like doing it by action. Even though I think that's probably the most impactful, is just doing it consistently in action instead of just always telling them. They'll just kind of, by being in my proximity, hopefully do some of those good things, hopefully the good things that I'm doing. So that's how I think, even though, not having a father, how I'm trying to lead my son, by even when he sees it or doesn't see it, every once in a while, I invite him to read, Bible with me at night when I read, but often I just let him watch his show. I don't want him to feel like I forced him all the time. He has his own questions, and then we can kind of dive into those questions as they come up. I think that's how kind of just I try to be the example to follow. But I am definitely a work in progress. Let's see. The verse it gave for this one is Deuteronomy 6:6-7. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. I think I can get better at that and make it interesting. It reminds me of when my son was having an issue at school, and I didn't. He was kind of getting bullied, but kind of like somebody was just treating him bad. In like a kickball game or something. It wasn't like anything horrendous, like, getting bullied. He just didn't like the way the kid was kind of talking to him or like treating him when they were playing. And, and I'm kind of like butchering the details, but I remember he came to me and I kind of like was thinking, okay, well, we're Christians, so we're not supposed to like fight back, but, I want to protect my son. But I don't want to just be like, oh, like do the right thing. So since I was like kind of stuck, like I think I was maybe reading it or I had read it the night before. I remember like I read like in Proverbs how, to give your enemy a drink of water, when they're thirsty, and you'll make a friend, for life. And like, that's like, oh, no, that it'll be like pouring like hot coals on their head when you treat them with kindness and you give them water. And it was something like about giving them water, will be like hot coals on their head. So kind of like killing them with kindness. But when I quoted that verse to him from Proverbs, about like giving, sharing your water with your enemies, and how it'll be, like killing them with kindness and like pouring hot coals on their head. I think I was I was given the example to kind of encourage him and to be like biblically like pulling it from biblical wisdom, because I know he definitely sees like some power or strength in like things that come from the Bible. Um, and I was like, this is all I got, like, because I don't really know, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, and then we're gonna be in the office. It's like, did you tell your son to hit this kid? And one, that's just not necessarily something I would do. So why would I tell my kid to do that? And yeah, didn't want to be caught in that mess. So when he heard that, he kind of was like, oh, like, dad, like, why do you got to say something like so wise? Like, I was like, it's not me. Like, this is all I got. This is what's coming to mind from the Bible. Um, he actually took it very literally, and he shared his water with this kid. And it's so funny that he took it literally, but still him sharing that water with that kid actually turned that kid's attitude to be like a friend towards him, and they became really good friends. I was just amazed at it, like how I kind of just surrendered to like this ancient wisdom. My son just took it literally, and it worked. Like it worked literally. He shared his water because they were like, it would happen when they were out like playing at like PE time, and the kid just like totally changed his attitude towards my son. And I think it's something to be said. I've heard about how this wisdom and this ancient wisdom, whether like you believe in the religious things of it and like the faith part of it, the spiritual part of it, like I think there's something to like ancient books and ancient wisdom, especially when they were coming from times that are super turbulent and like violent, and you just never know like what things are going to happen. I'm not saying it's super different from the time we're living in, but I would have to believe that life was a little bit more turbulent, a little bit more like um, just you had to lean a little bit more on having some faith that your crops are going to grow, or that you did the right thing to save food enough for the hard times. So like wisdom from those times, I think, and they're still being studied today and practiced today, I think, is something to be said of the wisdom in the Bible. So, hey, my son took it. It worked out. I didn't have to, encourage him to fight or stand up for himself. He shared his water, and hey, he made a friend. Um, let's see. We go into the last question here. How can I move forward with faith even when I don't have all the answers? How can I move forward with faith even when I don't have all the answers? I dare say I don't know if I can move forward with faith. Um, Sometimes I'm just moving forward. And I guess it is with faith, but it's not the grand faith that I think gets preached about sometimes, and that get encouraged to have like all the time, and like just extensive faith and confidence. Um, I think just inching towards, um, being a better father, or just being a good father, or just taking a moment and removing myself and spending some time and saying, God, I need you to give me patience right now. I need you to just like help me feel like I'm loved. There's definitely been times like that. And thank God that I have been working like on my relationship with God, where I feel like that does feel a little bit more genuine, doesn't just feel empty. Um, and when I don't have all the answers, I think just being honest with where I am. Like if I'm in a doubt state, I think just being honest, like, man, I'm doubting right now, and I hope God's okay with it. Like I don't necessarily have faith that I'm like being a good father and that things are going to work out. If you can give me some direction, if you can, you know, help me see that everything's going to be okay, or point me to somebody, or point me to some resource, or point me to some book, or point me to some scripture, or to some song that's going to help me realize that everything's going to be okay. And that even if it isn't okay, I know there's hope in what you have set in my life, and in my children's life, and beyond that. Um, and, one thing that came up that I remember sharing about kind of like faith and not having all the answers, because we were talking about Luke, the second chapter of Luke. No, sorry, the first chapter of Luke. When Zechariah, who is the father of John the Baptist, gets word from the angel Gabriel. Actually, that's how we got Gabriella's name. So it's like the girl version of Gabriel, the angel of Gabriel. So Gabriel comes and he's telling Zechariah. So Zechariah is the father of John the Baptist. John the Baptist is the person who kind of sets the scene for Jesus. He's just giving you some context if you're not too familiar with the Bible. He sets the scene for Jesus, telling everybody, to kind of like get ready because like this great person's coming along and he's going to change everything. So the father of this person, so the angel comes to Zechariah and is telling him, hey, you're gonna have a baby, and Zechariah doesn't believe it because him and his wife are of old age, and he's like, how is this possible? We're of old age, and he doubts. And in his doubting, he actually becomes mute as like a punishment because he's doubting, even though but he still gets his son that he had been praying for. And so in our men's group, we were talking about like doubting, even when we had been like praying for something to happen and then it's happening and we're doubting. And then we're talking about like, just like, what do we do to kind of overcome that doubt? And I think that's kind of what this question is getting at, how do we move forward? And for me, the first thing is just admitting that I'm in doubt. Like, I'm no better than Zechariah. Like, I question all the time. And it even led me to sharing like how even when doubting Thomas, right? I shared this with the episode with my buddy Eric, how like, that's just, I know it's not beautiful. I know it's not like, the sexy faith position to have and what everyone wants to hear and is encouraging. But I'm not too far from, or maybe or less than Thomas, who doubts that Jesus resurrected, even though everybody's telling him, just because he missed it. And Jesus shows up still though. So he's like, I won't believe it until Jesus shows up and I, see, that he resurrected. And Jesus does show up. He does show up and shows him his hands and the holes. And even though he was doubting. So I find some encouragement in that, and knowing that the first step is for me is just acknowledging that's where I am. I'm doubting right now, even if I don't have all the answers, and just saying that. I think saying that, the faster I say that, the faster I move towards that, then next step is, find somebody, find a resource, whether it's a person or a book or a therapist or a family member, or prayer or a song. Like, I think first it's just realizing I don't have it all figured out. I am in doubt. And searching for, taking a moment and searching for where my roots are. And where my roots are they near a stream? Is there a stream nearby that I can latch onto? That I can feed off of? That can have enough overflow and enough life that I can connect to help me get back to where I need to be, so I can be that good father that I long to be, that my kids need me to be, that I can only be when I admit that I don't have it all figured out and I need to lean on God's gift of other people and on God when I take the time to reconnect with him. I think that's the only way that I've been able to figure out how to move forward. And, I'll leave you with this. So in the next chapter of Luke, in Luke chapter 2, because we're moving through Luke, it's a couple long chapters, but one thing that super stood out is like Jesus is like 12 years old, And this is only like childhood story, I believe, that's in the Bible about Jesus, but he's in the temple. Like they're there for, I think, the Passover. His family is in Jerusalem. I think so. I may be wrong, but they're there for Passover. So like they're in the main city, the city center, to celebrate Passover with other Jewish people. And Jesus, it's kind of almost seems like he's like not a part of the party. He's just like in the temple studying with the other priests there. And it said that they were amazed by his questions and his understandings. And when I read that, like, oh man, even Jesus had questions. Like, whether they probably weren't the doubting questions that I have, but it was so wonderful and so refreshing to hear that like even Jesus had questions. And just questions about questions. And I kind of dug into that for a bit and learned more about like Jesus answering questions and what that would look like for like a young boy who is an Israelite studying scripture and studying with priests. And in that culture, I think they lean into questioning things to seek more understanding, to find more gems and more depth in the wisdom and symbolism and stories that they have written and that have carried on, for thousands of years. And it's only when they question things that they can get deeper and have deeper understanding, because going through that journey of questioning things, right? A lot of times in school, in the church, we're told not to question, just understand, just have faith. Just, I said it, don't you understand it? And that's the way it is. And that has never vibed for me in school or in church. So it was refreshing to know that in that culture and for Jesus, it was just like, it was okay to question. And questioning was the only way sometimes that they would allow you to learn, or that you could even get a deeper knowledge. And it kind of pushed me towards pointing out how in a lot of his parables and a lot of his discussions, he answered questions with questions to help people think for themselves a little deeper. So I think that's the last thing that I'll leave there, that I definitely don't do a good enough job. Even though I give myself enough space to question things, I need to do a better job at like pushing my kids to ask questions, and even letting them explore the questions that they have with further questioning, to see like they may just have a new understanding that I've never heard or nobody's ever heard, but I can only allow them to discover that by having that space of just questioning and wondering and having like their own perspective on it. And so that's something that I know I need to get better at, to just to help them. And that can be in any area, whether it's spiritual or sexual. Because if we don't get those questions out, they're going to go and ask somewhere else, or they're going to just hear somebody else's wisdom, on any of the things, whether it's like substances or school or careers or money or sex or the Bible or spiritual, whatever it is. If we don't allow them to come to us with those questions and make us, as fathers, as mothers, as guardians, to be a safe space for questions, and for wonderings, and for just not knowing, when we don't do that, I think it's kind of be a dangerous place. So that's something I want to work on as a father, is getting better at that, and just remembering to hold that space, and even just to welcome it even when they're not asking questions. So that's all I have for y'all for today. Just me kind of navigating and exploring and talking through my journey as being a father, and how I'm doing, and how I'm trying to improve. I hope this has been encouraging, just uplifting, or just interesting episode to listen to. Like I said, I will have some more guests coming up soon, just talking through some things. I think everybody who's listened this far, and that I've just stuck along, I know there's definitely a handful that listen like to every single second. So I am super grateful if you are listening this long, and continue to come with content that is just kind of serving and feeding your roots, hopefully. And, if you have suggestions for topics or questions, I will try to, I'll put them in the comments, text me, email me. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, I welcome everybody. It is really just a hangout. We talk, whether you're male or female, mother, father, single, whatever. Just welcoming it. Just want to have, whoever wants to be on this podcast, whoever's kind of digging what's going on here. So thank you everybody again for listening. Until next time, y'all. Peace.